Thank you for joining us. I'm Councillor Mary-Ann Brown. I'm the Chair of Rural Councils Victoria and also a councillor at Southern Grampian Shire in the west of the state. Firstly, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we all gather today and pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. I'm on the land of, we're actually at the confluence of a number, the Gutjadamara, Budgewing, I'm a bit rusty on this, and the Djab Wurrung people, and make our acknowledgements. We have a number of mayors, councillors, CEO and staff from across the state, and I know that looking at the list that a number of you have been in areas that were affected by the floods last year, and some also from the bushfires a couple of years ago. So it's really good that you're able to join us today. I'd also like to welcome, there's a number of RCV committee members who are joining us today as well. So thank you to them. So this is the first webinar we're providing to Rural Council Victoria members in 2023. We started doing this in 2022, and it's a new initiative we've undertaken to complement our forum that occurs every year as an in-person event, and we're focusing on issues of particular concern or that are particularly relevant to our communities. I'd just like to welcome, we've got 3 staff from Emergency Management Victoria who are going to present today. The other thing I would also like to acknowledge, I believe we've been joined by Joe Rotino, who's from the National Emergency Management Group. If I'm right, I'm thinking Joe's a former Mayor of East Gippsland, so welcome to Joe as well. Good to see you with us today. So the staff we have from Emergency Management Victoria, and we'd like to welcome Amanda Leck, who's the Deputy Commissioner of Capability and Risk, Melanie Mills, the Director of Preparedness and Risk, and John Stowell, Acting Manager of Emergency Management Policy and Projects. Given the tight timeframes on this round of the Disaster Ready Fund, Rural Councils wanted to give our members as much information as early as possible. EMV have also advertised a general information session, which is going to be held on Wednesday, the 8th of February. I'm not telling most of you anything new, but it's fair to say that rural Victoria has generally taken the brunt of recent and historic natural disasters. Most recently, it's been floods, but we're also subject to bushfires, droughts and storms. Rural Councils Victoria has been advocating for access to mitigation funding for a number of years. At this point in time, Victoria still doesn't have a betterment fund, unlike New South Wales and Queensland. We are going to continue to encourage the Victorian Government to assist rural councils to prepare for future disasters and also to make sure we are reducing the impact of any disasters that do occur in future. In the meantime, we're looking forward to an overview of Victoria's application guidelines. There will be plenty of time for questions at the end. I'm now going to hand over to Amanda Leck. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you very much, Mary-Ann. Good to see you online, and thank you very much for the invitation from Rural Councils Victoria to EMV to present to you on the Disaster Ready Fund and the process we're going to follow in Victoria. I'd also like to acknowledge all of the mayors, councillors and staff that are online from Rural Councils Victoria. We know that risk and resilience occur at place, and you are the level of government that is doing a lot of work to support communities to reduce their risk and to build resilience for whatever is to come. So I'd like to acknowledge your contribution to that. I'd also like to introduce Melanie Mills from EMV, who is our Director, Preparedness and Risk. Melanie is leading this part of the work as the director responsible. I'd also like to introduce John Soul, who's also online, and John is the acting manager, EM policy. And John has been doing a significant amount of work to set up the process for Victoria. EMV has been nominated, if you like, or we've sort of self-nominated with discussion with other departmental colleagues that we would lead this, as it ties in very well with the risk-based planning that EMV has led for the whole of Victorian government with regard to the planning tiers at both the regional and municipal level. So that's sort of our interest in this work. We've done a significant amount of work in Victoria on understanding and identifying risk, and this is our opportunity to mitigate that risk. So our objectives today, Marianne, and to your colleagues, is that you'll have a good understanding on an overview of the Disaster Ready Fund. I'm not sure how many of your colleagues have read the Commonwealth guidelines, but we'll give you an overview of the DRF, an overview of the application process that we're going to follow in Victoria and what we've done to establish that. We'll have a discussion with you about some of the proposals that your local government areas may wish to bring forward, and how and what a co-contribution to that could look like, given that a co-contribution is mandatory. We'd also like to cover off with you, if we could, by way of discussion, where and how Rural Councils Victoria members would like to be consulted with for any projects that the state is looking to put forward around particularly bushfire mitigation and also flood mitigation. So the former DELP, now DECA, have been doing significant work in that area. And given the timeframes for this this being round one, are very, very tight, if we could, work with your members to do some consultation collectively rather than sort of having to go to each LGA and find the right person and so on, that might somewhat truncate the process. So we'd be keen to explore with you if that's an opportunity that we might have. So I'll just ask John if he would to share the presentation. I'm going to lead off, and then Melanie will take that forward. And then at the end in the Q&A, Melanie, John and myself will seek to answer your questions as best we can. Thank you, John.
I can tell a joke, Amanda, if you like.
Oh, thanks, Cuddy. Michael and I go way back to being colleagues at CFA. John doesn't have access, so Marianne, you will have to, whoever is hosting this meeting will need to grant permission to John to share.
Kate.
Hi again, John.
Yes.
There we go. We'll go straight, if we can, to the next slide, John. Okay, so I'm not sure how much you know, so we'll start at the beginning. The Disaster Ready Fund is a new 5-year Commonwealth program worth $200 million per year to address disaster risk reduction and to address programs that build resilience in communities. So this was an election commitment from the Labor government, and it's $1 billion effectively over 5 years. It is a real stake in the ground, and it responds to the Productivity Commission review of 2014 that suggested that 10% of funding currently spent on recovery should be shifted toward risk reduction and mitigation efforts. So it is very much a significant effort to do that. States and territories can apply for the DRF, and each state and territory has negotiated with the Commonwealth that there will be a baseline funding allocation of $7.5 million from that $200 million. However, after that first 7.5, it is a competitive funding process. As I said earlier, EMV is leading this for Victoria. EMV's role is to coordinate emergency management across the whole of Victorian government and with all levels of government. And so, we were best placed to do this. And we've also led the work on establishing all of the risk-based planning at regional and municipal level. What our requirement will be is to collect project proposals from across a broad range of sectors for inclusion in one overarching Victorian application. So EMV submits on behalf of Victoria a prioritised application to the Commonwealth for their assessment. So it's important to recognise that ultimately the Commonwealth will be making the assessment about what is and is not funded. However, NEMA has indicated to Victoria in our consultations with them that how we prioritise those projects is an important consideration. We will need those project proposals to us by the 16th of February so that we can run our own assessment process, which Melanie will take you through now. So over to you, Melanie.
Great, thanks Amanda, and good afternoon everyone. Great to see so many people online and obviously very interested in this program, which is great. So the big question I think for everybody is around the co-contribution part. So we're going to talk later in the presentation about some examples of what that could look like. Just in terms of the guidelines, applicants must contribute at least 50% of eligible project expenditure towards each project. So co-contribution costs can include but are not limited to, and we've got a list there, direct cash funding contribution provided at the time of project commencement. Funds that the applicant has already invested in a program or project on or any time after the 1st of July 2019, and only where the Commonwealth's contribution from the DRF is expected to extend or enhance the program or project subject to alignment with the DRF objectives. Any costs associated with the applicant's delivery of the project, for example, construction or project delivery, and other in-kind costs such as wages directly attributable to the delivery of the project and or supplies, materials, equipment, etc. But we will go into some real sort of examples towards the end that might help, because I'm sure there'll be a few questions around this. John, we'll go to the next slide. So how to apply? So I think if you've received, hopefully you received from us, there was an email with all the information that came through from the Commissioner, but project proposals will be submitted through Smarty Grants, which is a web-based grants management system, which you might already be familiar with. It's a portal that's accessible on EMV's website. You basically register an account, submit the form online and attach all your supporting documents, evidence, including an indicative budget template and a project logic template. Applicants for the MPA's Risk and Resilience Program will need to resubmit their proposals in Smarty Grants in March. So if unsuccessful through this, that'll be another process in March. We'll move to the next slide. As Amanda mentioned, there will be a prioritisation that will need to occur. So that will be collected by EMV through this process and assessed by a panel of cross-sector EM experts from across government, which Amanda will chair the panel of for that. As part of the application, project proposal will be prioritised for the Commonwealth assessment. Projects submitted in Victoria will be prioritised based on their alignment to a range of state strategic plans for natural hazards, as well as state, regional or municipal risk assessments. So I think, you know, referring back to MEMPS, to REMPS, to the State Emergency Management Plan, to risk assessments, any other strategic documents that sort of, or sub-plans or any other work that might occur at a local level would be really valued in terms of making sure it meets some of those strategic plans. The assessment panel will share its prioritised list of project proposals with the Minister for Emergency Services for endorsement. In terms of the actual Commonwealth assessment, there's 3 criteria that is the focus. The first one is obviously the project details, and that's weighted at 40%. And this goes into the actual detail, which I won't go through all of this now, but your response needs to include all these levels of statements to ensure it meets the requirements for a submission. And I think if anyone's having problems with any of this as they're going through it, the team at EMV is very happy to assist. We have a generic email address, so questions could come through on that, or we're very happy through John's team to assist in any way that we can to make this as easy as possible, because we do appreciate it's very tight timeframes that we've been given by the Commonwealth for this to get the applications in. So very happy if we can help in any way. So there's a list there for that first one. Criteria 2 is the likelihood of project success, and this is weighted 30%. And this is around capacity to complete the project, the capability, you know, in terms of similar scale projects you might have delivered, value for money. And then the third criteria is alignment, as I said, with existing plans and strategies. So detail and the extent to which the project meets the DRF objectives, evidence the project is supported, particularly around First Nations stakeholders where relevant. And you're obviously local government, so I presume you obviously will be supporting your own projects. Detail on how the project aligns with any existing state, territory or local government, disaster risk reduction policies, risk assessments, as I mentioned, and detail regarding why this project is not able to be funded through other potentially more appropriate sources. In terms of the outcome of them, NEM will advise EMV of outcomes of the project proposals from the Victorian application during May and June, is what we've been advised. EMV will then draft letters for the Minister for Emergency Service to advise project owners of the outcomes of the funding process. So in terms of what we think a co-contribution could look like, and this is where we're happy to have, if there's questions that you might have a project you're thinking about, we can have a chat around if you've got any questions. Expansion of existing programs you're running already that you think would focus on the objectives of the DRF. Media or comms campaigns or education campaigns that you might be running that you think could work with this program. Community engagement programs, capability development programs, capability uplift in terms of staff, etc. Current infrastructure works, and these have to be focused around resilience. So, and I might get, I'm sure there'll be a few questions around this. John will be able to speak a little bit more about this, but in terms of what can be funded under infrastructure and work that you might be doing to do with storms and post the floods, etc., that we've just had. So I think that's my last slide. I'll just go to the next one. I think it's got some links to further information, if that's right, John. Yep, so some useful links there. That's the email address I mentioned for any questions. No questions silly, because this is the first time we've done this. So we're also checking in a lot as well in terms of understanding how it's all going to work. And we obviously want the best outcome here for Victoria on this and to get some really good projects funded. So we're really looking forward to getting some really good applications in to support our communities. I think what would be probably best now is I hand back to Marianne, because I think the main point hopefully is to get some questions from people and help anyone who needs extra assistance. And also if you wanted to put your question in the chat, we're very open to that as well. So I'll hand back to you, Marianne. Thanks.
Thanks, Melanie. There is one question already in the chat, and then I'll open it up, which is how many applications can each LGA submit? Is there any limit?
Not that I'm aware of. That's a great question. I think we're up for as many good applications as we can, you can provide, and then we can assess. So yeah, and there's a fair bit of money there, as you can see. So yeah.
And given there's a prioritisation sort of approach to this, you want to put your strongest applications forward first, I would suggest. The other thing I would suggest is, we would certainly entertain applications from multiple councils. So if, Rural Councils Victoria wanted to, I'm making this up, Marianne, as we go along, we're thinking out loud, but if you wanted to run a community awareness campaign about being prepared for risk, for example, in your LGAs, we would entertain, applications from multiple councils working collaboratively as well.
Okay, thanks for that. I'll open it up. I think that gives us a really good overview. I'll open it up to questions from participants. So if you could raise your hand using the little reactions one, that would be helpful, because I can't see everybody who's with us today. So interested. Jessie Holmes first, and then Scott Barber. Thanks. Good to see you on board, Jess.
Hey, Marianne. Thanks for organising. Yeah. Good to see Tuddy's face on the screen as well. We're all excited about that too. Yeah. So just in relation to, I guess, the EMV requirements that there's no, the document stating that there's no state contribution towards these projects. Is that just in relation to this first round and the fact that the time frame has been what it has been? And because obviously it's out of alignment with the Victorian kind of risk and resilience funding that comes out annually as well. Is EMV working towards making sure there's an alignment for a state contribution towards this as well? Because Marianne's mentioned that the rural councils are kind of most at risk in relation to disasters, and ultimately we're also the least prepared to be able to fund one-to-one contributions for some of the big scale projects that we need. So I'm just working on the goodwill of the state government will come in round 2 to 5, and it's just the timing of this one. But if that's the case, then I think that this timing will be far less advantageous for small local councils, and we'll probably wait for round 2.
Look, I'm happy to take that question, Jessie, and certainly the limitations of the timing for round 1, you are correct. We are out of cycle with regard to the state government budget cycle. We have had discussions with our Treasury and Finance colleagues who sort of indicated to us that in future years, we would need to be, going through the normal, budget cycle and so on. But there's been no guarantees made to us that there will be a future Victorian state government co-contribution fund available.
Can we just flag then maybe that if they do this first round and it doesn't look like there's many applications, that it's not due to need, that it's probably due A, to the tight timeframe in relation to this funding being available, and 2, in relation to the lack of contribution by the state government in making it an actual kind of viable option for small rural councils. So just flagging early that if there isn't multiple applications made, it's not because there isn't demand or need, it's because the nature of the funding hasn't quite hit the mark for who it's targeted at.
We'll certainly ensure that your comments are provided to the appropriate areas, but as I said, there's no guarantee. Having said all of that, NEMA has indicated to us that they are very keen to support multi-year programs or funding programs. So, for example, even tying in with your own local government's funding cycle, a year 1 program could look like a scoping study, and years 2 and 3 could look like implementation, allowing the local government concerned to also be able to apply funding in the out years of the program.
Thanks, Amanda and Jessie. Jessie, we'll take note of that as well, because that will be an issue rural councils would be very happy to raise with the state government. Now, I'm just going to take a liberty here, and Liza's posted in chat. I think she just had a comment or question that sort of follows on from that. So that Eliza Tipping, is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Marianne. I'm from Macedon Ranges Shire Council, so I very much echo what our previous speaker, sorry I haven't recalled her name, but just to follow on from that, we've got some council support funding that we're waiting on, a potential extension of following the floods last year. We've also got DRFA claims underway. What my question was around, because we've got some urgent works that we're not 100% sure will be funded by those revenues, we are wondering, we figure this is a great opportunity to maybe leverage the Disaster Ready Fund to cover some of the recovery works we need to do, but there's just a few parallel activities going on. So Council Support Fund and the DRFA claims. Can we do an application through this to supplement those, or is that, it might have been covered in the...
Look, I'll go to John for the detail, but my understanding is that you can't leverage under any previous Commonwealth funding. So
John,
if you've been funded by the Commonwealth through DRFA, you can't leverage that for the DRF. Is that correct, John?
John, you seem to be on mute.
He might need to take his headsets off, John. And
but just for, sorry, while John's getting off mute, it's just that we don't know the outcomes of those processes yet. So this opportunity is, we've got to put applications in by mid-Feb. We don't know the outcomes of our claim or additional CSF funding. So it's just the timing.
Well, remembering the focus of this program is risk reduction and resilience building, not recovery work.
Yes, but someone did mention earlier that there was room for that sort of work. Sorry, I'm getting it.
I think John's come back in, so we might just see if he can see.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Hi. So I think what Amanda was referring to earlier is broadly correct in that proposals sort of generally should steer clear of anything that has prior Commonwealth funding. But we're happy to take that query offline and give you a more comprehensive response, given that there's some specifics there that I think we probably need to clarify.
Thanks, John. Now, Scott Barber, I think, is next.
Thanks, Marianne. Thanks, everybody. A couple of things. I'll just follow on from Eliza's question. So for me, I guess DRFA has been used or will be used to fix and repair what we've been through. We've all talked about this idea of betterment. Can DRF be considered for preparedness for the next event and actually building it to the next standard up? So I think that's one of the questions you might want to take back, John, and see if that makes sense. You can repair a culvert, but if you're preparing and putting in a bigger piece of grey infrastructure that prevents a flood in the future, we're actually doing a good thing there. So if you want some more examples, just give me a yell and I'll try to help there. My question, Marianne, and I don't know if this is for John, Melanie, or whoever it might be. How do we know what the state government positions will be for some of these projects? So under Stream 2, I think it is, we can look at more systemic projects and approaches. One of the things we'd like to look at is improved or updated flood modelling. That usually comes in through what was DELP, your CMA, to your local government representatives. How do we corral something like that together in this instance?
Yeah, and that, Scott, goes to the comment I made earlier about the consultation with local government for those, if you like, big ticket items that the state is looking to fund through flood mitigation and also bushfire mitigation. So there has been a significant proposal put up around flood mitigation, and some of that has been funded. Now, we have spoken with DCAR colleagues who've worked on that, such things as flood studies, incorporating flood studies in local planning schemes, flood levies, for example, that there are, I think, around about 10 of those that are, if you like, slated for future years, and how this fund could be used in part to fund those activities. Now, our DCAR colleagues are working on that. And I suppose the question we had is, can we consult with all of the rural councils concerned, on those, rather than, because of the time frame, having to, do each consultation, one by one. So how would you like us to come back to you on those sort of broader flood mitigation and or bushfire mitigation programs?
I'm just wondering, Amanda, whether there's an opportunity that we set up another webinar, because we did have, we had a couple of webinars following the floods last year, which there was some really good discussions at those webinars about some of the flood studies were mentioned then. So I think if if there were specific questions that needed to be addressed, we could try and put those together, put to an agenda, and then put the invitation out, because I think we've obviously got a lot of interest here today, and we certainly did at those webinars last year as well. And if people know what the subject matter is, they can come along with some thoughts, and hopefully there are some common themes that emerge, which I expect there would be. That certainly was the case last year.
We'll reach out to our DCAR colleagues through Melanie and see if it's possible to set something up with particularly those rural councils who may be included in this broader funding bid around flood studies and or flood mitigation works.
I think just as before I move on to the next question, I think there were probably 30 rural councils that were impacted to some degree by the flood events last year. Some of them very severely impacted, obviously, but so it was a significant number of our members that were member councils. So we'd certainly be happy to do that. Now, I think the next person who had his hand up was Brad Drennan. I think I can't see him on the screen anymore.
Yeah, sorry, man. It's Brad from Alpine Shire.
Yep.
Just in regards to the infrastructure side of the funding, I think she says there'll be some more clarification later on. Are we able to get some more clarification around what projects will be funded under that and what mitigation projects we could look at potentially applying for this funding for, given the fact that most of our other funding, exactly the same as Macedon, sits currently with the Council Support Fund, and noting that we can't, or we still haven't got an answer on that fund yet, whether or not we can apply for projects that were unsuccessful in that. But I guess we're just waiting on an answer from LGV in that regard as well.
I'm not sure who wants to take that, John. I mean, we can't, I suppose, you know, that's between yourselves and LGV really to understand where that funding line sits.
Do you have any indication, my question probably back is, do you have any indication when LGV is supposed to make the announcements on those?
Not as of yet. No, we've got no indication from them. But however, if there is things that we've applied for that may not be eligible, we also don't want to lose the opportunity that this funding could possibly pick that up on. So given the fact that we're in a sort of a situation where we're waiting on one department over another, if we've got two funding streams and one gets accepted and then automatically gets accepted through both of them, then we've just, it
might be something for us to also follow up with LGV, their timing on that, we're going to obviously do some FAQs following this. So in response back to you also, we'll follow that up and see if we can find out an answer, because that might give us some clarity on that one.
Yeah, I think that would be good. Now, I can't see the chat's mostly about that co-contribution and eligibility, which I think we've sort of picked up on. Are there any other questions? I can't see any hands.
There's a question from M. Brown. If a project is already in place and the DRF will value add, can the co-contribution be retrospective, or is the start date when the funding agreement is signed? So yes, it starts when the funding agreement is signed, but you can use a co-contribution. I think the date, John, is July 2019. So if, for example, you've been running a flood mitigation program that started in 2019 and that was funded by the state or your local government, you can leverage that funding for increasing the scope of that works, but you can't start that increased scope until the funding agreement is signed. So you can't discount out what you've already spent, if that makes sense.
Yep.
I hope that answers your question.
Thanks for that, Amanda. David Lowe, Councillor David Lowe. I think you might be on mute, David. No. No, still not working. David, do you want to go out and perhaps come in again and we'll see if the sound's working? Still.
Or type the question in the chat, could be another option.
Yeah, or put the question in the chat. Yeah, thank you. While David's doing that, any other questions at this stage? There is a comment from Brian is saying that any funds or co-contribution invested in a program after the 1st of July 2019 can be used as a co-contribution. So,
well, not any funds. It can't be Commonwealth funds.
But if Council, David, are you going to try to talk or posting in the chat? No, don't know what's happening there.
He looks like he's posting, Marianne.
Right, thanks.
Typing away. The date, Eliza, was the 1st of July 2019.
That's in the guidelines as well, can I say, Marianne? So just check the guidelines.
Yeah. So,
can I also say we've been given advice from the Commonwealth, and certainly it's in one of the supporting documents, but look at the National Disaster Risk Reduction Framework when you're looking at priorities around risk reduction and make sure your application addresses those key areas. It is in our, links to further important documents, but the Commonwealth has indicated to us that that is important, that is considered.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fiona Stevens.
Hi, Marianne. I'm just helping Councillor Lowe out. His question is, given more than one application, need they be related? Mitchell Shire has problems with both fire and flood. Would that matter?
No, they wouldn't need to be related. So you can put in as many as you want.
Okay, thank you.
But can I also say that if you have a project that reduces multiple risks for your residents, that would be highly valued. So that goes to that issue of systemic disaster risk. So if you can sort of run a project that has multiple benefits for a variety of hazards, I believe that would certainly in terms of our prioritisation would score well against our assessment criteria.
Okay. Just double checking the chat. Jessie Holmes is just confirming what will be the channel for local governments to know what projects state departments are putting up, and so that's the first question. What will be the channels for local councils to know what projects state departments are putting up? Do they have the opportunity? Well, first of all, do state government departments have the opportunity to put up projects?
Yes, they do. And I think that might have gone to Amanda's point at the start, is maybe having a discussion with you all around that consultation piece, because they need to consult with local government and whether there should be use this as a forum for somehow how we would do that consultation in a very short time frame to assist them as well. So I'm not sure, Marianne, whether that might be something we might want to also focus on.
Yeah, there's quite a long, there's a related question to that from Scott Barber, who's given an example. For instance, Swan Hill Rural City has an incomplete flood study from DELP, the Northern Central CMA for the Swan Hill area, and then another study for the Robinvale area.
I've already asked that, Marianne. I'm just getting a response. Thanks.
Good, excellent, thank you.
There was a question, Mary, I saw about the 7.5 million and whether there'll be two lists. EMV will submit one list. We only have the opportunity to put one application forward. Yep. So the point I was making earlier is that each state and territory has been guaranteed 7.5 million. Over and above that, it is contested funding.
Yeah.
But NEMA will make the decision on what is funded and what is not funded, not Victoria.
Yeah, okay. Are there any other questions? There's quite a bit in the chat, which hopefully we'll be able to pick up in the notes and further sessions. Does anybody have any other thoughts in regard to the process of consultation, which Amanda identified at the start? If we do run another webinar, which we would need to do pretty quickly, is that probably the most efficient way to try and get some feedback? And we need to do that, prior to what have we got, till the 16th of February, so we've got about 2 weeks. What sort of timing are we looking at?
Marianne, I think the best thing is for us to reach out to our DECA colleagues in the flood and bushfire space and ask them if, how they would also like to do this, and you could canvass your own members, and then hopefully between both conversations we can facilitate a coming together of the parties for a conversation about those, state mitigation priorities that are tied to, state flood strategies and state bushfire strategies and the like.
Okay. I think, Amanda, we certainly would have a high level of interest from our members. So if we were able to do something in the next 10 days or so, that would be, I think, would be well received. Are there any further questions or comments on what people have heard today? Okay.
Could I just reinforce, Marianne, about that multi-year funding option or opportunity? Because it is a very short time frame for year one, putting in for a scoping study or the like that, you know, councils can use existing staff for a co-contribution is certainly something the Commonwealth has indicated to us they would consider. So that may be an opportunity. I can't remember. I think it was Jessie up front said, you know, councils haven't had the time frame to, you know, allow for this in budgets. But if there is something in your, you know, strategies or business plans in the forward years that you would like to do some scoping work and so on, that is certainly something that you could look to leverage the DRF for in year one. I mean, there will be no guarantees, of course, for funding in years 2, 3 and 4, but it is certainly something that you could look to do.
Yeah, look, thanks, Amanda. I think that's a really good point, because that is sort of the first step. And similarly with things like flood studies and the like, which identify, you know, what possible measures might be taken to reduce the risk. Sam's just asked a question, is the timing of subsequent rounds like you don't know? Is that meaning you don't know, or?
We don't know. The consultation for this between the Commonwealth and the states and territories started in November, and then the fund opened on January I want to say 9th, John, or thereabouts.
10th.
So we were reasonably surprised by that date. We were not advised prior to them opening the fund. So certainly the states and territories will provide feedback to the Commonwealth on the time frame and so on, but we have been given no sight of what future years looks like.
Okay. Thanks for that, Amanda. Any further questions before I wrap up? Okay, I'd like to thank Amanda, Melanie and John for giving this opportunity today, which obviously has been well received. I think certainly I've found it informative. I'm sure that some of the staff who work more closely with this, I hope they found it useful as well. And we'll certainly would appreciate the opportunity to do some sort of group consultation. I think, as I've said it, you know, our communities by and large do bear the brunt of many of these events, unfortunately. And as Jessie has pointed out, many of our member councils really have not got the financial capacity. In fact, have got less financial capacity than other larger councils, so which makes it very challenging for us. So certainly we would certainly welcome that opportunity for further conversations. So thank you again for your time today, and I'd like to thank all the participants who've joined us today. Hope you found it useful, and we may well see you on the screen in the very near future with further discussion about this particular funding opportunity. So thank you for that today. Thank you. And I think we're going to stop recording now, Kate. Is that